As you can see, this is a controversial topic that I'm undertaking, and I'm doing it in as humble a heart as I can. I just want to bring that up at the beginning. Okay, I'm not, all things. I'm not an expert in all things gender spectrum, gender diversity, but I think it's a really important issue and something that we need to talk about and do more studies about. Okay, so hello everyone, my name is Kelli Ling, and I'm co-author of a qualitative study proposal on expanding gender education, and that would be beyond the traditional binary roles and physiology of males versus females, for elementary students, and specifically kindergarten and first grades. Okay, I know that's young, but I'll explain further as we go along why I'm focusing on those two really early primary grades. And before I forget, thank you IHSES for having us and for allowing us to share our ideas and our work. Okay, so what inspired this project? Well, there was more than one reason, but one I want to share with you. An undergraduate student came up to me after class and said, "You called me she, Mrs. Ling, but I prefer they." And this happened more than once, okay? And this is a poignant wake-up call to me as a concerned progressive educator, because I always thought I was, fairly, pretty sensitive to my students' needs, but I completely missed the significance of using preferred pronouns when addressing this particular student in class. Okay, and there's an intersection of interests, I would say, too, okay, for me as one of the co-authors. The other co-author, and I'll just really quickly go back to that slide, she did the illustration and also did a lot of the work, too. But I thought this was a wonderful way to sort of visualize this proposal, right? Why it's important. Okay, I'm not going too fast, am I, folks? We're good?
No, you're fine. You're fine. Thank you.
Okay. Just want to be sure. Okay. So this was a wake-up call for me, okay? And I decided that I needed to do more work and more research on this. I know we're in the US, I'm in the US teaching, and you can go on the news media anytime and find so many different events and incidents regarding whether gender instruction should be expanded, attitudes regarding transgender students, such as athletes. I mean, there's just so much out there. Mm-hmm. So again, this is based on two assumptions I'm making, okay? One is that gender is a complex issue, okay? Not a simple issue. And I say that because I sat with a peer educator of mine pre-COVID, okay, in a cafe, and we were talking about different concerns we had with contemporary student issues. And one had to do with how do you use preferred pronouns? How do you deal with gender identification that's different, right, than what you may have been taught or you may self-identify? And this peer, who actually is 15 years younger than I am, okay? I'm in my mid to late 50s, and she's much younger than me. She turned to me and she said, after a few moments of quiet sort of reflection, she said, "Well, we all know what we were born as, I think." And that was a stopper of the conversation right there, because right there, that's a pretty close-ended way to talk about this. We all know the gender we're born as. Mm-hmm. People in the gender minority don't necessarily feel that way. And I believe as an educator that we need to be open to all different types of gender identification in our work. So the second assumption here is that gender identification outside of the traditional binary genders is not pathological, folks, okay? In this study proposal, we're looking at it in terms of a range of normal and healthy human development, and that may be different than a number of educators have believed, okay, or the perspective that they take. It's just important to know what the assumptions are going into this, okay? So, recognizing and respecting how students see themselves. When educators only cover issues in the health curriculum related to binary gender roles and norms, male versus female, and then, of course, reproductive physiology and anatomy, it can leave out a population of students who are in the gender minority, and that would be transgender students, gender nonconforming students, right? Anyone who maybe isn't cisgender. And when I say cisgender, you guys are familiar with that term.
Yeah.
That just means that we're okay with we agree to the biological sex that we're assigned to at birth. Okay. Not everybody feels that way. Oh, and I should also say, in case I do run out of time here, like Rick did, I also uploaded the slides, the PP slides, so that you can see all 40 slides in this. I know it's too much for a 13-minute presentation, so just to let you know, you can take a look at that if you're interested. There's also been some wonderful research already done on this by Elizabeth Meyer at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I encourage you to take a look at her work. What can happen when gender minority students feel undervalued, right? Well, we know from research, Dr. Meyer's research and other research, that they may become isolated from others. They're sometimes the victims of bullying and harassment. And according to there's a typo in this, the CDC research, the Centers for Disease Control, they're more vulnerable to depression and suicidal behaviors in later high school years. So are you beginning to see why this program, this proposal is starting at such a young age, right? Hopefully, if we can address this issue and help students to be more inclusive and accepting of themselves and their peers' gender identification early on, right? That this will stay with them throughout middle and those later difficult high school years. So, okay, and again, I'll just really quickly, thinking and teaching outside the gender binary box, that's what we call it. It's focused on the twin goals of awareness and implementation of age-appropriate course materials, okay, for educators working with kids in the 5 to 7 age range. And again, I'm talking age-appropriate. It has to be done in a way that for example, the children's books, the activities are such that students can understand and at that young age, because they do have questions, even at that young age, be allowed to discuss this with teachers and with peers. And I want this to happen before these young audiences form strict binary gender views and stereotypes, which they will, and fairly soon. Okay, and as Mia was talking about, I do have a number of justifications for the study idea and proposal because it is so controversial, okay? And I'm aware of that. So we're not assigning morality to this problem area, folks. Instead, we're focused on the ethics of offering educational curriculum and learning environments that are inclusive of all students, right? As well as diverse. Okay, and I better keep going or I'm going to run out of time here. So this tells you a little bit more about this proposal. Okay, some of the qualitative research questions, if you were asking educators, do you agree or disagree? Because the educators are the priority population, right? The target audience, target population for the study. Do the earliest elementary grades of kindergarten and first have an influence on the development of students' attitudes regarding gender diversity and gender norms in either themselves and or their peers? We've got to find out, right? Another question, do communication exchanges by teachers in the earliest elementary years have an influence on their students' attitudes regarding gender constructs? A third, does awareness of gender diversity create a more positive learning environment for elementary students in grades K and first? And then the fourth builds on that. Does awareness of gender diversity in the earliest elementary grades impact future middle and high school acceptance of peers who are in the gender minority? Okay, and the sort of working hypotheses, right? It's hypothesized that early childhood educators in these grades, right, who implement this suggested gender diversity curriculum into their existing like health or sex ed classes will experience positive educational and health outcomes with their students. Okay, it's further hypothesized that this positive trend in attitudes and behaviors towards oneself and others in the gender minority will continue into later middle and high school years, thereby helping to reduce discrimination, bullying, and harmful behaviors such as suicide attempts. So as you can see, this is the expectation for this is quite high, right? We're reaching for a lot here. Okay, proposed methodology. Well, focus groups, right? We definitely need focus groups because those are invaluable to gain insight into these questions and hypotheses. And we advocate small size groups with no more than like 6 to 8 teacher participants at a time. The rationale behind this is so that study participants can talk freely with one another on complex, controversial topics without feeling limited to simple yes and no questions. Also, if they feel embarrassed, right, they can develop trust in these smaller groups. Just getting educators to be a part of this is going to be kind of an obstacle, I think. So I'm sorry, this is a little bit light. I don't like this graphic very well, but basically what it's just saying here is that we want a collaborative communication environment. Okay, so that study participants, if the educators start out at a state of resistance, as we're discussing these issues and then even building a future health communication campaign based on this research, that maybe they'll move from a state of resistance to a state of neutrality and maybe even acceptance. And as you can see, this trajectory follows the paradigm of Sharif's social judgment theory, which is based on those latitudes of acceptance, rejection, and non-committal of an issue. But in this instance, we're discussing constructs involving gender diversity and gender norms, and educators' willingness to teach these constructs to young students in age-appropriate ways. Okay, wow, I'm running out of time. Okay, experimentation, right? Surveys are needed to help assess attitudes and behaviors on gender diversity curriculum, and we need to craft these carefully. Here we're asking for a greater than 70% response rate. I know that's really high. Might as well strive for the highest we can get, right? Also, we want educators to feel comfortable answering these open-ended questions as honestly as possible. So we'll emphasize that this is confidential and anonymous. Okay, here's some possible survey questions. To educators, one, I'm aware that children in grades K and first are beginning to become more aware of prescribed gender differences and stereotypes, such as what colors can they wear, right? What toys can they play with? Which gender can they interact with? That may impact how they learn and socialize in school settings. The second one, I don't want this to be loaded, but I think it's important to ask, as an educator, right, you agree or disagree, I do not hold attitudes and or behaviors towards people who are gender identified differently than myself. And third, as an educator, I know what to say when a student asks me about being non-binary gender or transgender, agender, really any gender description that is different from their assigned biology of birth, which we call cisgender. Okay, very quickly, because you can again see this, it's all uploaded on the IHSES site that they provided for us. Sampling, right? Sampling, it's going to be based on probability theory, okay? It may be wiser to do a stratified random sample. Why? Because educators who work with kindergarten students may vary quite a bit, right? Just within that group, and certainly from educators who work with first graders. I know the age range is 5 to 7, it's really close, but there's still maybe considerable differences between those groups. So those subpopulations might be better to sample them independently. That's just one idea. Okay, and of course here we just look at a theoretical assumption of a population size of 1,000 educators and a sample size of 100 and how this could be expressed. That's a pretty basic one, I know. Duration, the longer the better, right? In order to get better data and also make adjustments to this curriculum so that rather than have it be eliminated or disbanded, that we can continue on, right? We can continue on with some parts of the program that work and maybe adjust other parts of the curriculum that aren't working as well. So longitudinal studies would help to see any changes in teachers' attitudes and behaviors on gender diversity instruction to young audiences. Okay, and this just basically says the same thing. Cost, we're all worried about that, right? Do we have the money? Well, guess what? We have to determine that in the state of Illinois, which is where I live, they have already mandated that this additional curriculum be included in history classes. So for you history folks like Mia, I believe it's K through 8th grade. It could be K through 12, but K through 8th grade, they have to include the historical contributions of people like Sally Ride, right? The first American astronaut, gay astronaut. But the problem is they mandated this historical discussions of the LGBTQ plus community in classes, but with very little to no financial backing. So how are they going to pay for this, right? Got teacher training workshops, course materials, maybe stipends for educators involved in curriculum development. There's a number of costs. Okay, applicable theories. I know that we all get kind of sometimes bogged down with these underlying theories, but I just want to explain where we're going, right? Where this started, where this is heading. Weinstein's precaution adoption process model is a persuasive communication theory we're building on. McGuire's persuasive communication model, right? And then Bertalanffy's system theory. Okay, these are three that sort of scaffold this work. And again, you can see this in the PowerPoint slides. But basically, the precaution adoption process model, it outlines specific stages, right? That describe how people come to their awareness of issues and then whether or not they decide to take action. Okay, it's considered psychologically based and also considers qualitative differences among study participants that influence change. And here, I don't know if you can see this very well, but there's the stages outlined and where the end stages are, right? In terms of persuading educators. Communication for persuasion theory, that's a long one, 12 steps. It's teleological, it's outcome oriented because it moves toward the goal of either confirmation or rejection of these proposed new behaviors, okay? And here are the 12 steps, right? Too long for, I know, our short time frame, but I did give a few examples on how you might apply like steps 4 through 6, right? Step 4, I just wanted to bring your attention to understand it. Gender is a complex issue. Again, this is an assumption, but this is what we're working with. To at the very least, understand how it could impact students positively and negatively in later middle and high school years. Okay, this is important. Step 6, hopefully accept the change that is being proposed based on empirically based studies like Elizabeth Meyer's work, right? Okay, so this is a hard issue, I get it, but I think it's really important. Remember and validate the message in step 7, and then step 8, be able to think of the message in relevant contexts or situations. Okay, so we're arguing that this is context dependent. And again, we're targeting just K and first graders. Okay, system theory, right? You guys have heard of system theory, I know. It's a basis for understanding human behavior and interconnectedness, right? The parts, right? How the parts affect the whole.
Kelli, we're at the 20-minute mark.
Okay,
So.
yeah, okay, let me wrap up here quickly. Okay, system theory is another one. the importance of her work. I just want to really quickly share some facts, especially if you're not in the US. Only 4 states at the time of this presentation even attempt to address this area. And there are states that mandate against this instruction. So we're talking about a lot of pushback on this, right? Okay, and just here's some examples, right, of books that can be used for the different age groups, age-appropriate materials. So in conclusion, schools need to realize that gender is more than the body we are assigned to at birth, okay? Hopefully the study proposal based on relevant persuasive communication theories will make a small but worthwhile contributions to efforts involved in teaching gender diversity curriculum and expanding that. Okay, and then I just wanted to know what your thoughts were. I know we may not have the time to share, but how do you feel about this issue? Okay, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.